we are jumping into week 2 of a series that we're calling Right on the Money. Right on the Money, and we are talking about money and finances. So to kind of tee the ball up this morning, the first 2 weeks of this series are very much focused on your head and your heart. Kind of laying the foundation, laying the groundwork for how do we view money? How do we view possessions? How do we live this out? So last week, week 1, Pastor Scott walked us through what does kind of a healthy, godly ambition really look like? How do we live that out? How do we keep from rocking the boat too much this way and leading towards being lazy, right? And then how do we also avoid rocking the boat too far this way toward workaholism? How do we keep it kind of straight and narrow? So he talked about that. Today, we're going to unpack and really focus on what is money? What does that look like from a biblical perspective? What does God say about money? And then the next 2 weeks in the series, weeks 3 and 4, are going to be very practical. Okay, once I understand week 1 and week 2, now how do I live this out? How do I work this out day to day? So anybody here who didn't grow up with much money, like if you didn't grow up with much money, raise your hand. Yeah, there's some of us here. When I was little, for a little while, I remember we lived in what I would call an economically challenged neighborhood. Most of the houses, many of them had like those barred security doors on them. There was even a few that had the security bars on the windows. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Up at the park where you could walk, there were groups of young guys that seemed to hang out a lot during the day, and they were dealing and fighting and hustling. So you really couldn't go up to the local park very often as a kid. Our next door neighbor, she was a single mom with a couple sons, and she worked at a local bar. So she was gone from like happy hour, 3, 4 in the afternoon, till about 2, 3 in the morning, just about every night of the week. This left home alone her 2 teenage sons who would fight for their right to party. That's what they did. I mean, they partied hard. Jack, Jim, and Mary Jane were regulars at their house, along with 10 to 15 other high school guys, just about every night of the week. That's how they rolled. A few houses down on the opposite side of the street, there was a guy who was a member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. So that was fun. And he and his buddies would race their bikes up and down the street, and my little eardrums would just ring. It was awesome. It was an amazingly exciting street to live on. At the time, my father had been laid off previously from the old coal manufacturing in Paynesville and had just gotten a new job at Lubrizol. Mom was finishing up school at the Willoughby Eastlake School for Practical Nursing, studying to become a nurse. But for many years, when I was little, I had no idea that we didn't have much money. I just didn't know. Like, my parents didn't say things like, we can't afford that. That's not how they talked. It was more like, we're just not going to do that right now, Sean. That's how they couched it. That's how they rolled. So for a while, I didn't know. Until one day. And those of you that grew up without much money, do you remember the day when you realized you didn't have much money? Like, ignorance is bliss, right? Like, I loved our street. I loved living there. I was happy as can be until one day. Now, I remember it almost like it was yesterday. Plus, I talked with my Uncle Dave this week to clarify a few things. My Uncle Dave at the time, he worked for a super wealthy family that lived in Gates Mills as the caretaker, basically, for their estate. And I'll never forget one of the first times my family and I got to go out there and spend some time. I think it was a Saturday. I was 7, 8 years old. And I still remember the drive up, and I mean up, into Gates Mills for the first time. Because I remember looking out the car window and thinking this, and then turning and asking my mom, Mom, why are there so many schools here so close together? She says, Shawnee, that's what she called me. Shawnee, those are homes, dear. And I don't remember a whole lot more about the rest of the car ride there, except just imagining, what do they have in those homes, man? What's in there that they need all that space? So we get to the estate, right? The grounds. And we pull in. This is one of those homes that had one of those driveways that's like longer than your street, right? Like, you pass those today, and they've got the 2 columns out front of the light posts, and you're kind of rubbernecking. What do you got back there? What are you hiding? If you're like me and you have like this overwhelming sense of curiosity and no friends, you will pull this home up at some point on Google Maps, satellite mode. I'm gonna see what you have back there. Wow, a pool, tennis courts? Oh, that's nice. I like that. That's really nice. Honey, look what they have. That's really nice, right? Now, this might sound strange to some of you, but at this point in my life, I had never remembered seeing double front doors like this. I'd never seen doors like this, where you've got doors side by side, right? I'd never seen this. I saw these doors, and to my 8-year-old mind, they were like Jurassic Park-sized doors, right? And I remember wondering, what does anybody need doors like that for? Who needs this? Since then, I've totally figured it out. When you've got that kind of money and you've got a house like that, when you walk into your house, you want to use both doors because you want to walk in like this. Right? It's true. It's got to be true. I'm fairly certain that those doors cost more than our house at the time. But I remember walking in to the main house, and there was just ornate marble and hand-carved wood everywhere. I'd never seen marble flooring before in my life. Never before. At that point in my life, the only 2 home floor services I was familiar with was like indoor-outdoor carpeting and linoleum. That was the rabbit hole for me. And I remember at one point, we walked past this particular room, and I froze in my tracks, and I looked. It looked like a museum. It was immaculate, like sterile even. And I remember looking at it, and you could even see the mow marks from the vacuum, right? Like it was untouched. And I said, Mom, what is this room? Oh, that's the formal living room, honey. What does that mean? She said, oh, that just means no one ever goes in there. And I was like, rich people have rooms that no one uses? All right, I want to be adopted. Where's the Lord of the Manor? Where's the man? I want in, right? It was amazing. At my house, every room is like a multi-purpose room, right? Like this is the kitchen and your bedroom, right? That's how we live. This house was amazing. I mean, I remember the bedrooms had beds like this high. You had to like pole vault to get up on. They had these little step stools that you'd pull out and you'd walk up and get up on the bed. But I remember leaving one of those first few times, and as we're getting into the car, I'm thinking to my 8-year-old self, man, we're poor. I mean, compared to these people, we're downright destitute. Now, when we read stories in the Bible, that, like we will this morning, that talk about wealth and talk about rich people and talk about money, it's kind of easy to sit back and convince ourselves that Jesus is just talking to those people, right? People with driveways longer than our streets, double huge front doors, homes that look like museums, private jet planes, islands, tigers on a gold leash, right? But that's just not the case. Historically and globally, we're the rich. We're the rich. Because what tends to happen is we'll look at someone who's 1 or 2 rungs above us on the class ladder, and we'll say, oh yeah, when Jesus is talking about money and wealth, he's talking to those guys. Sure, but he's talking to us too. Those of us with indoor plumbing, electricity, at least one vehicle, he's talking to us. And Jesus had a lot to say about the subject of money. If you took all of Jesus' teachings on hell, prayer, and heaven and lumped them all together, his teachings on money would outweigh those still. If Scott and I talked about money as much as Jesus did, none of you would be here. Ever, okay? Why did Jesus talk about money so much? It's not that he was trying to get your money. It's that he was trying to prevent your money from getting you. This is why he said things like, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What he means by that is that the movement of your money signifies the movement of your heart. Where your money goes, that's where your heart's going. You exchange money for what you value, what you treasure. So I want to jump into one of those stories. I want to jump into a story Jesus told that's recorded in a book of the Bible called Luke. And this is a story about like a visionary, an innovator, an entrepreneur who was super successful at what he did. And this guy, he fell for the myth that so many believe, regardless of how much or how little they have. He fell for the lie that he could find his self-worth, his security, and his satisfaction in money. We catch up with Jesus in Luke chapter 12. At this point, he's teaching a few thousand people. And he's teaching on a variety of subjects. And as he's getting his teach on, he gets interrupted. This guy somehow makes his way to the front of the crowd, and he interrupts Jesus. It says in verse 13, "Hey, Rabbi, excuse me, right here, teacher, yeah. Tell my brother here to split the inheritance with me." Now, here's something I bet you've never seen in your life: a family fight over money. And I'm sure none of you have ever had an argument with a spouse or another family member about money. That doesn't happen at church, right? But here's a family who's fighting over an inheritance. Because you know what they say: where there's a will, there's a relative, right? So this guy truly thinks an injustice has been done. And he's already done his calculations, so he doesn't ask Jesus if this is the right or fair thing to do. No, he's already concluded, I deserve this inheritance. I deserve this money. Jesus, you just need to tell my brother here to fork over my cheddar, my moolah, my money. And he wants Jesus to have his back on this. Verse 14, Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" So Jesus refuses to play referee in this family argument. But in verse 15, he throws down pretty strong warning to this guy, those people standing around listening, and to you and me here this morning. Jesus said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Let that last phrase just kind of marinate over you for just a minute. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Jesus doesn't say your possessions are bad. Jesus doesn't say that your possessions are from the devil. He says you're not going to find any life in them. He says there's no life there. See, money is amoral. In other words, it's not inherently good and it's not inherently evil. You've got to have some money in life. But Jesus says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Or watch out for the love of money. Because life cannot be found in an abundance of possessions. Life cannot be found in money or anything that money can get you. See, greed isn't measured by how much something costs, but measured by how much something costs you. And to drive that home, Jesus tells a very provocative story here in Luke chapter 12 about a guy who's got some money. In today's world, he'd be kind of a workaholic venture capitalist kind of a guy. Verse 16, Jesus starts the story. He says, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest." So Jesus gives us a little bit of background. He tells us this guy's wealthy. A little bit of extra background for you. Jesus, at this point, he's teaching in a very agrarian society. They're farmers. So your wealth was predicated upon the land that you owned and the crop that it produced. So if you had land that was producing mad crops, you were a baller. You were rich. That's just how you rolled. Verse 17. Jesus says, he thought to himself, what should I do? I have no place to store my crops. In other words, what am I going to do with all this money, right? Now I want you to notice, Jesus doesn't criticize this guy for being wealthy. Jesus doesn't tell him that it's bad. Apparently he's made his money honorably. He's worked hard. And I think if Jesus were telling this story today, I think he'd say something kind of like this. So this affluent guy drives up into his home on a Friday night, parks his sick whip in his 6-car garage. Sick whip is a nice car, just so you know. He goes into the house, throws off his jacket, kisses his wife, and makes his way down the hallway to his office, where he sits down in front of his ginormous mahogany desk. He pulls out his iPad and he wakes it up. After all, he's got a lot of heavy thinking to do this weekend. He scrolls through the spreadsheets, checks the projections again, and he's super excited about the direction his business is heading in. I mean, he's come a long way since maxing out his credit cards in that one-man operation he started in his South Euclid garage. His net profit is huge. So he's got a decision to make. What am I going to do with all I've got coming to me? I mean, this thing is still gaining momentum. It's still growing. And then the lights go on for him. Verse 18, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And that's where I'll store my surplus grain. Notice, he doesn't plan on doing anything evil with his returns. Maybe he taps open the blueprint viewing app on his tablet and he starts looking through the plans his architect and engineer emailed him. These plans are next level. I mean, this new sprawling complex will allow him to triple his infrastructure and take his business to places his grandfather could have never dreamed when he immigrated to this country with nothing but a few bucks in his pocket. Sure, it's going to mean 16, 17-hour workdays for a while. Yeah, it's going to take new HR systems to surround himself with top-shelf talent. It's going to mean negotiating new deals with suppliers. There's work to do for sure. But he's looked at the numbers, right? He's looked at the return on his investment. He's looked at the cost-benefit analysis, and he's run the projections through with his lead team several times. And now the amazing feeling of satisfaction, excitement, and pride that comes from believing you've covered every possible contingency just kind of starts to overwhelm him. He takes a deep breath, closes his eyes, and rides the high that comes when you realize money. Money that will set you up, will free you from work into a life of 24/7 luxury and set up your family for generations. That kind of money is at his fingertips. Verse 19. I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, be merry. I'm finally going to have what we all want. I'm going to have a sense of self-worth because I'm going down as a straight-up legend in this industry. I'm going to have a sense of security because my family, they'll have what they've always wanted. I mean, what can touch us with this kind of money? And I'm going to have the satisfaction I've always wanted because I won't want or need for anything the rest of my life. We'll take the finest vacations at the best resorts, eat at the finest restaurants. I'll buy whatever I want, whenever I want it, and that'll be my life. He's still kind of riding the money high when he starts to feel kind of an uncomfortable pain in his chest, kind of a squeezing pressure, really. He starts to feel a pain in his left arm. The pain works its way up through his shoulder, into his neck, and into his jaw. He gets like this splitting migraine headache. And then he starts to perspire. He starts to sweat. He kind of leans forward in his chair and says to himself, man, I must have some indigestion. Whew, must have been the sushi I had for lunch today. He starts to stand up. He can't stand. He collapses with his head down on the desk, right on top of his iPad with all those plans. 6:30, his wife calls for him. She's all dressed and ready to head out to their favorite restaurant. Got a little corner table that overlooks the city. Same spot they hit up every Friday night. He doesn't respond. After calling his name for the third time, she kind of makes her way down the hallway and she sees that he's collapsed or fallen asleep on his desk. And she thinks to herself, man, here he is again. When is he ever going to slow down? He works way too hard. So she walks over to wake him. She puts her hand on his shoulder and she rocks him gently. There's no response. And just like that, everything changes. His body's still warm, but he's gone. Autopsy results show a sudden, massive heart attack. The irony is this man that had quickly developed a reputation as one in the business community who covered every possible unexpected scenario had no contingency plan for the most predictable event of life. I mean, it's not like God has kept death a secret, right? I mean, research indicates 10 out of 10 people are going to die. All of us are going to have a last day. And while his family, the business community, and his financial advisor, they mourn his loss and celebrate his life, God eulogizes him in a bit of a different way. Verse 20, God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself?" Who? Let me ask you a question. What was this guy's fatal flaw? I mean, why did Jesus call him a fool? Was it because he had a lot of money? Because he was rich, affluent? No way. Not a chance. The Bible tells us about many wealthy people. People like Abraham, Job, Solomon, Nicodemus, Lydia. These are people that God had an amazing relationship with and God used to do amazing things. So it's not that. What was his fatal flaw? According to Jesus, a fool is someone who lives their life without any thought of God. Someone who lives their life with no thought of God's activity in their own life, in the lives of others, or in the world. Maybe this guy had thought to himself, you know what? Maybe one day after I've taken care of my family and I've set us up for life and everything's taken care of, maybe then I'll think about this whole soul thing and maybe then we'll give away some money. But that day never came. See, this guy had been so busy making a living, he completely missed out on making a life. Jesus wraps up his teaching by saying this in verse 21. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. Jesus isn't criticizing his affluence. He's criticizing his arrogance. It wasn't wrong to plan for the future. It was just that his plans for the future didn't include God. See, our money has us when we live in such a way that shows that we treasure money above and before God. When we rely on money, not God, to meet those same three core needs that every single one of us has in our lives: the need for self-worth, the need for security, and the need for satisfaction. Like, how do you determine your self-worth? How valuable are you? Listen to me, if you only take one thing away from this message this morning, let it be this: you are worth the life, the death, the blood of the Son of the living God. That's how valuable you are. Did you know that? And if we could just get this in our heads, if we could just get this into our hearts, we could walk away. We could walk away from deals. We could walk away from shopping. We could walk away from the comparison game. We could walk away from equating what I have and what I earn with who I am. We could walk away from that. And we could say, you know what? I don't need money. I don't need to prove my self-worth today because the God of the universe proved it once and for all. Your worth. I'm so passionate about this. Your worth was established when Jesus died on the cross. He went to the cross and he bought you. He bought you with the price of his blood. Once and for all. The Bible says Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom, a payment, a substitution for you and for me. And when you get that, when you realize, you know what? I cannot add value to me or to my life through purchasing a new iPhone or more clothes or more shoes or a bigger house. Jesus established how valuable I am once and for all. When you let that reality sink into your soul and you walk in light of that identity, the awareness that God paid the highest price in the universe for you, it would change your entire sense of self-worth. It would give you an almost indescribable sense of security. And it would satisfy your soul like a deep, abiding satisfaction that money and things cannot hold a candle to. It will set you free. And when you view money in light of that reality, when Jesus becomes your treasure, not money, when Jesus becomes your security, when Jesus is your satisfaction, it makes living out the things we're going to talk about in the next 2 weeks possible. Spending wisely and giving generously. Let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for your word. Father, I pray that we would not be ashamed or shy about our passion for communicating what your Son has done for us. Yeah, God, I get emotional when I think about it, because I look at where I was, how I lived, and what you've done and who you've made me into today. Thank you. God, I pray that you would continue doing the same work in all of our lives. That people sitting here this morning who did not know that, or thought that a relationship with you was predicated upon, was based upon, was built upon doing things or trying their hardest, would realize no, that you paid the highest price. You sent your Son to take our place because you love us that much. And that the only thing we can do in the light of that grace, in the light of that mercy, is to fall on our knees and accept it. That's it. That's all we have to do. God, help people here who have done that walk in light of their new identity in you. And help us to look at our money and our possessions, our stuff, that all of it's destined for a landfill. All of it. Help us to look at those things through your eyes and act accordingly. We love you and we praise you. It's in Jesus' name I pray.